Okay, we're going to jump into Logic Pro 10 Lesson 2, and this one is recording audio. So think about it. We've got several places here to record audio, and really, unless we understand the basic principles of this, we're not quite ready to jump in and do that. But if we can all agree on all of the settings and the details that a person should know before they get into that scenario, then I think we're in good shape. So this could get out of hand. This could be a little bit bizarre, but I'm gonna lay down a horn track on the top of this beat that we were working on yesterday, and it could be nonsense. Who knows? Well, it's helpful to kind of overview the process as always. We're going to set up our digital audio settings. We're going to record a single track. We're going to talk about recording multi-track audio. We're going to record additional takes. We're going to record in cycle mode. We're going to re-record sections by punching in. We're going to adjust our count in, our metronome, and some of the other settings. Then when it's all said and done, we're going to delete any unused audio files, which just helps keep our project nice and clean, nice and tidy. Keeps it small, so if you wanted to share it, you're not dragging a bunch of files and audio that you don't really need. So the process of recording audio is pretty much consistent across any device, from a microphone through our audio recorder device into a computer and back out again, of course, by the time we get out there. But essentially, sound is vibration in the air, and that vibration, the sound pressure waves, get turned into a digital audio file as the microphone transforms that sound pressure into an electrical signal. So the microphone cable is really just an electrical cord, and there's electrical signal coming down there that's been translated from the microphone's capsule. So the preamplifier is right at your recording device, and obviously we don't have those on our computer, but an audio recording device has a gain control, an input control, something along those lines, and that's your preamp. That's the very first thing that's going to take that electrical signal and boost that signal up a little bit. Then inside your audio device, there is an analog to digital converter. It's going to take that electrical analog signal and it's going to convert it into a digital data stream. And if you've heard, a digital data stream is just little combinations of ones and zeros communicating that analog information to the computer. It's really kind of mind-boggling when you think about it. So that audio interface then sends the data stream from the converter into the computer. In this case, in this particular interface I'm using, it's through a USB cord, but in one room it may be through a FireWire cable. And it could be, we're going to be doing this through ADAT, Dante, through AVB. It's called networking. Basically, that's something we could get into, but for the most part, that's the last step. Your device has translated that, and then it's sending it through to the computer. So really, when you think about it, it could be a long time for that to happen, but it happens in milliseconds, and that's why there's a lot going on, and that's why we have to talk about all the digital audio settings so that we're all on the same page. So let's jump over into Logic Pro. The very first thing we need to do before we get into recording a project is check our Logic preferences. So we go to Logic Preferences, get your mouse recording here. We're going to select Audio. In here is where you're going to find all of the devices that you have available to record with. In the class, on the computers, we don't have anything plugged into that to record with. We don't have an audio recorder device. In the case of this computer right now, I've got this one called the Scarlett Solo USB. And basically that's just a mic input and a line input. So I could plug a guitar into that if I wanted to. I could plug a bass into it, straight into it. We are going to double check. In this case, I'm using built-in output. Now I normally wouldn't do that, but since we're doing this screencast, I want the sound to go ahead and come out of here. It's just the easiest way to do that. So normally, you wouldn't want these two to be separate. That's kind of a recipe for disaster. But since I quote unquote know what I'm doing here, well, it's not a great plan, but it is the plan at any rate. So we've got these two that are different. We are going to actually close out with a little conversation about this I/O buffer size. So it's going to get a little bit heavy towards the end, but again, we're trying to get our knowledge up to the highest level possible. Now we closed out of those logic preferences. Those are global. That's for all of logic. The whole program is going to operate by checking those settings. That's going to be how we get into, anything in logic is going to go through that, essentially. Now, what if I want to get into a different set of options? In logic, there is project settings. There are project settings, I should say, just like some of the options available for logic preferences. There's a similar array of options in the project. So if I wanted to change some project-specific settings, that's where we go next. So from the File menu, Project Settings, we're going to select Audio. Now, in the audio area, we're going to look at this sample rate. Now, the sample rate is the number of times per second that the audio is sampled. So basically, this process that I described from start to finish, how many times per second is our device capturing that signal from the microphone and converting it into a digital stream? So 44,100 times per second. That's kilohertz. 44,100 times per second. That's quite a bit. So we're going to have some different options as we open that sample rate window. 48,000 is kind of a standard for video production, and that's essentially the ballpark of what we would want to use most often. Now, if we're thinking in terms of producing audio in, not for CDs, I understand we're not making CDs, but if we're producing digital audio for SoundCloud and that kind of thing, 44.1 is the standard for that. It's the CD quality audio standard. Now, why would we not just want to max this out all the time? Well, because we're asking our processor to do all of the work on the back end of that. So if our processor is grabbing 44,100 samples a second, that's going to be pretty difficult. But then if you take the processor and you ask it to create, or to rather, to process 192,000 samples a second, then you're basically kind of maxing it out. So it's hard to say if it's worth it for our computer to do that. Essentially, as well, there's not a great, we don't really have any equipment that's going to let us hear any difference between this and this. We might be able to sometimes, somewhere, hear a little difference between here and here, here and here. But essentially, we don't have any equipment that's really going to let us tell the difference between 48 kilohertz and 192. So essentially, we've got some equipment that can do that, and that's kind of the big thing. If you're buying an audio gear, someone's going to say, hey, what's the max sample rate on that? Okay, so that's what we're trying to understand. So we have gone in here, we have set the project settings, we have double checked our preferences. So many times people will come into me and say, hey, Mr. Harrell, I can't get the sound to come into Logic. The first thing I do is I pop open the preferences and I say, where are we at? Okay, what are we dealing with? So that's called solving problems. Okay, so we're ready to do that. And then I feel comfortable saying, hey, why don't you go in there, because you can troubleshoot that, because you've watched this and you've understood it. Next, of course, we went into our file project settings and we checked that. So we are going to go ahead and leave that the way it is, and that's good. We're going to close out with some I/O buffer settings, but the next thing we're going to do is get in and do just a few things in the recording realm.